announcements?
I don't have any other announcements.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll make one final announcement. I was gonna take this moment to announce, this will be my last meeting, serving on the school board for Monona Grove. I'll be resigning due to relocating to Texas in the next few weeks. So, and it's been my pleasure, I've been on the board for 6 years now. It's been my pleasure to represent the students, parents, all the stakeholders in the Monona Grove, Cottage Grove community. It's kind of bittersweet for me because when I first started out, I had certain goals, certain things that we wanted to achieve, and it's kind of been nice to come onto the board and see the board grow over that time. And I like to think it's been, I had some part in that. But once again, I just want to thank all my fellow board members for the support they've given me over the past 6 years, and a lot of positive things in the future. And I just look forward to keeping in touch with you guys and seeing how the district's doing.
Best wishes to you in Texas.
Thank you.
We'll get visitors to Houston.
Send us some money back.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the district, not only do I want to personally thank you, but I think the district wants to thank you for the leadership that you provided to this district during this time in a lot of different ways. You met with me several times and worked with the administration on a lot of different issues that you had a lot of good, solid knowledge about. In particular, I think our harassment policy and bullying policy reflect a lot of your input, your personal input, and your personal time in making that a good, solid statement for our district. And I personally appreciate it as well as the district. Thank you.
Well, we do have our traditional token of appreciation, if I can get that here about it.
Cake, I don't do the cake.
That you can take with you.
Oh.
Just as a reminder, it's over here. Thank you very much. And I would also, obviously, on behalf of everybody but myself, thank you for your service. And I said this to you in an email, but I've always appreciated your, I think, very thoughtful comments on really every issue. You raised good questions. You made. And that's a very significant contribution. So I think you've been a very strong board member and certainly appreciated your service. Thank you very much.
I say we go to 11:30 tonight just for old times.
We might have.
Why so early? Let's make it 1 a.m.
12:15.
Well, when I heard this, the more the better.
That's right. All right. Well then, if there are no other announcements.
Make one question.
No.
If we all quit tonight, do we get one of those?
You have to give Joyce some lead time.
Consider yourself
But,
noticed.
yeah, I said now that the teachers get those
Pretty
at
quick.
20
Dean will be
years of
quitting.
school. Anyway, yeah. So that's, you can aim for that.
It's nice.
It is, yeah, it is nice. And there is a, when you leave, we'll put it back in the box with the bubble wrap.
Do you want to see all the
Break on the way
pictures
out.
from the parades?
That's right.
Oh, man.
That's right. All right, then we will move on to administrative reports, and the first administrative report is the superintendent's report.
Okay, I have 2 items I'd like to report on tonight. The first one, I think you were aware, last month I had an opportunity to visit and be a part of executive briefings with Apple at their executive briefing center in California. And I was invited with a handful of other superintendents from Wisconsin. It was strictly Wisconsin superintendents with the county executive, and we had a chance to meet their education team. And so it was a learning experience both ways, an opportunity to hear from them, and of course a little bit of a sales pitch on their end about what they'll do for education, but also looking for feedback from us about what we're doing in K-12 education. They do have a K-12 education team with a number of people that they've hired who have experience working, former principals, former teachers, and so on, for advising that. And it was really it was a very good experience. There's a bunch of information that I received that I've shared with our and will share with our administrative team. I highlighted in my written summary, some of the things that we talked about, so I won't go all through those in detail. But one thing I would like to talk about just briefly is how that does impact, or how Apple products in particular fit into our technology plan. You saw our 3-year technology plan earlier this year, and we're still in the process of doing a lot of evaluation about what are the right tools, for our kids and for our teachers in their work. As you know, a year ago we had the district purchase iPads for every teacher. We have a number of iPads in some of the grade levels in classrooms, throughout the district. But we're also doing a number of other, learning pads, Chromebooks, and really looking at not trying to isolate on a single device. And so as we work to look at some of the things with Apple, it is a very different than the PC world. Not only the devices, the iPads or Mac Pros, but also the apps that come with them. And so there definitely is a place in our district for that. It's just a matter of how much. One of the things that we will have an opportunity to do this year is to do a little bit of a pilot with some more Apple products. We do have some money available, grant money in our flow-through funds through student services, and so we are going to be able to purchase some MacBook Pros for our student services staff that will be able to pilot using that grant money and therefore doing a little bit of an evaluation about teacher use as well for the future. I think we certainly want to make sure we have mobile devices for our teachers. Perhaps are the iPads the right thing? Should it be a laptop that they can use in the classroom but also take with them, and so on? So it's still an evaluation process, and certainly when we come to budget time and capital projects, that'll be a big piece too of what are we purchasing with computer equipment. And
Did we get feedback, or I know when we talked about an iPad for every teacher, and did we ever put anything in place as far as feedback, maybe continuous feedback as whether or not, so we can decide whether or not that's the right tool for the teacher?
I'm not sure what was set in place at that time as far as a formal evaluation. I would say that most of that work is going through our technology committee as well as our administrative team, and Andrew sits on every one of those technology committee meetings as well, and so that's a good point. I think that's something that I don't know. I'm pretty certain there hasn't been a board report on that. A lot of it is anecdotal. We know that a lot of teachers are using it in very different ways. Many of the teachers use it regularly every day for their instruction. Others use it more of a resource for themselves, in preparing. So that, I think, is one of the things we want when we've talked to teachers about what is it that you need. Some, I think, would tell you the iPad's been great, don't change a thing, it's everything I need. Others might say that the more flexibility of having a laptop or something like that might be a better fit for them. So we've talked with the idea that students need different things. I don't know that we necessarily want to have uniform classrooms for teachers either. We might look at different devices for different teachers and kind of a menu for them to pick for, whatever it takes for them to teach.
Wouldn't it be better price-wise, so if we do have something universal?
Oh, absolutely. Well, yes, certainly buying in quantity for the price is important. Also for maintenance and hanging, maintaining our machines, not having a lot of different products. But I think we have some flexibility in there. There's certainly some things that have to be standard in classrooms, but I think other things we can be a little bit flexible on. So, but I think it is really important as we move forward with this. We talked about that 3-year technology plan really being a flexible plan that every year we reevaluate it and adjust it. And so I think it is important we keep you informed as well as we.
I thought Apple didn't give price breaks.
They have basically their education pricing,
Right.
But you can't really negotiate it, but
It's not-
Right.
yeah.
So it doesn't matter.
But there is, the technology committee is talking about that very thing right now, and they haven't, I think they're at the point where they're gonna review that, about how our teachers feeling, because I think you have to weigh what's gonna be the most useful and what's the most appropriate device, as well as just price. It isn't always just about price.
Yeah.
And that's not what you were saying necessarily, but you have to look at both of those things, and the committee has had some discussion about that, but pretty preliminary, am I correct?
Yes, and that's on our agenda for next week.
Right.
Yeah, and also
Yeah.
taking into
Yeah.
terms like durability and
Right.
replacement and things of that
Right.
nature.
Yeah.
So.
So I think to answer your question, no, there hasn't been a formal written evaluation, but I think informally, we've got people in the district absolutely could answer the question, how are they working, and it's within that committee, so. Okay. All right, and the second thing I wanted to update the board on was the Monona Community Media Committee, and I believe that's a new official name. It used to be the Cable TV Commission, and they met last week and spent a lot of time talking about the City of Monona LPFM radio station. As you know, Will Nimmo has been the media coordinator now for the last, I don't know how long he's been here, 4 or 5 months. He's done a tremendous job in coordinating that. His background wasn't necessarily in radio, but he's done a ton of research, and there's been a lot of really knowledgeable people in the city that have helped volunteer their time in the engineering part. And so the reason I'm reporting on it, it is a relationship with the school district as well. As much as that's owned by the city, as you know, Will works in partnership with the school district, and we will have student use with that radio piece as well. So that will kind of be the next phase, and he's starting that work already about how can we incorporate that into student involvement with that. Where they're at right now with the process, April is the time that it will be up and running. So the radio station will be housed in the Monona City Hall, but it is accessible remotely, so they can produce content even at the school that can be run through there. They don't have to be actually in the studio. And then I think when it goes live in April, they'll still be kind of on a part-time basis, and I think July is where they're looking for their big kickoff of really having 24-hour programming, and so it's really coming along well. So I think at some point as we get closer, it'd be good for us to bring Will in to report to the board on that as well, and specifically how our students are going to be involved with that.
Is the TV studio still at the high school?
It is.
It'll still be at the high school?
And
Yep.
part of the reason for the radio station at City Hall, they made a change their thinking, originally was 24/7, and they could access it whenever, and that's why they didn't want it in the school.
Mhm.
And I don't know if they're finding that was necessarily something they
I
had
think
to
that
have,
was-
but I think that was some of
Yeah.
the thinking that went
But
on.
everyone seems real excited,
Yeah.
the people involved in that project, that that's a great location, it'll be very visible, plus the antenna located there. They did get permission to use one of the antennas that were in place for the signal, and so it seems to be working really well. The other thing I guess I should bring up besides the radio station is our agreement with the city is up for renewal. The last agreement was signed a long time ago, 10 years ago or so. It wasn't written as an annual agreement. It was basically to be in place until there was a modification or mutual agreement amongst both parties. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it other than, things have changed since then, and so we're very satisfied with the partnership. We definitely want to continue it, but it is time to review and look at exactly what the terms are with that, and so we'll be working on that probably later this spring. That's something that certainly would come to the board then for your review and approval at that time.
Just to remind the board that this partnership between the city and the school district was the first in the state. I was mayor of Monona and would not negotiate the TV contract until they would pay for the studio at the high school, and we would have that partnership. That was back when there were 1,000 cable companies and that sort of thing. And it got established then with Bill Ziegler and my neighbor she went on to UW, taught TV use at the Pyle Center. I forget her name now, but it's a long-standing one and became the model for a number of school districts in the state.
Good foresight, thank you.
Yeah.
It's
It is.
It's really nice.
And that was something a little bit, the model was a little bit unique for me when I came to the district last year, and as I've learned about it, it's an excellent model. It's definitely something we want to continue. Some of the details we need to work out is not only the contract as far as the monetary part, but even the equipment. There's been a need for some upgrade of the TV equipment as well. Generally, the city has been paying for the equipment, but that's something I think we have some responsibility as well, because there is an educational use to it, and so those are the details I think that we need to revisit, at this time.
Yeah, one of the reasons that occurs is because that comes out of cable profit.
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an
Segue.
important,
So-
very important. Yes.
So it's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, the contribution we make is really for the administrative services
Mhm.
of whoever's running that piece.
Yeah.
And then, but we've seen great results from these things. We've seen kids, a lot of the students that are interested in media,
Mhm.
that hadn't had exposure anywhere else. The editing, doing the films, again, kids who sit through the school board meetings, and it's been a great thing. The coverage of the district, when we haven't had other means to do that, has been phenomenal.
Yeah. So, but there have been significant equipment upgrades this past year, so the quality has been upgraded considerably, and so of course our biggest concern as a school district is the student involvement and the education they're receiving. So that's something that Will is working very closely with the high school administration, trying to get more students involved, more and from just more opportunities. So
Well, and I think a really good example for those of you, again, the integration of how this all works is the Monona Grove Education Foundation's major fundraiser this year was the roast and the presentation of the grants, and Will actually taped all that, orchestrated it, and make sure, and including all the broadcasting and the discussion.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of beyond all the other things that are shown and taped.
Yeah. So all in all, we were extremely pleased with the partnership and what's happening under Will's leadership.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Then the next administrative report will be Director of Business Services, Jared.
All right, I have 2 items I want to report out. The first item is our budget development timeline. I have attached 2 board docs, our tentative plan for moving forward for the 2015-16 budget calendar. Tomorrow I will be presenting this calendar along with our updated process to our administrators at our administrative team meeting. To talk about it, one of the biggest changes that we're seeing is our previous budgets were based on enrollment allocations. So depending on the number of students you have in your building, you would allocate the building, distribute the money that they were allocated, come back, board approve it. We're moving to a zero-based budget process this time, and the biggest difference between allocation and zero-based budgeting is all the expenditures have been reset to zero, and buildings and departments will be requesting those and then having justification. I listed out some of the points that we need to be justifying for, how many students will be served with those expenditures, the population of students, how is it going to reach academic success, energy efficiency and safety. Those are the points we're looking at. As we develop our new strategic plan in the years to come, then those would be the key points that we'll be focusing on. Since we're coming to the end of our strategic plan, pretty much these points sum it up. However, we didn't use those words identically. So the biggest part of it is that the state budget will be released by the governor on February 3rd. We don't expect to see additional funds coming in. However, instead of bringing to you in January a PMA forecast without even knowing what the state budget is going to look like, what we've decided to do is start the budgeting process and with that zero-based budgeting. And then once the state budget comes out, PMA would start working with us, and we would do a formal presentation on our forecast based on the state budgets in March to you guys. And then we would in April present our developed budget based on what we received through the buildings and our zero-based budgeting process. And then we would ask for a tentative or approval of our preliminary budget in June because our fiscal year starts July 1. July 1 is when we will receive our first estimate for state aid. And then ultimately we will have our annual meeting in October with approval and the end of October once we are certified aid and understand our real enrollments. One of the things that I did add to the timeline is last year you had approved the preliminary budget in June, and then we went right into the annual meeting. In the month of August, I will also give you another update on the budget so you're prepared as we go into our annual meeting budget hearing. The process is, obviously we want everybody involved. We want to make sure that our stakeholders are being able to suggest items that will improve our achievement and move the district forward. The other part of it is the budget presentation will be a little bit more in detail. We'll be able to break out, specifically how are those expenditures being spent. Supplies, what is consistent of supplies? What is looking for the equipment, and being able to give more of a detailed explanation to the board as they approve the budget. Because I believe one of the most important jobs that you guys have as board members is approving that budget, and then being able to also explain that to our stakeholders in the community to understand where their property tax money or how the school is using public funds is going to make sure that it's really being tunneled or focused in the areas that see achievements. So, any questions on the budget planning?
When you go to a process of zero-based budgeting, is that something that then you do every year, or do you actually bring it to zero every
We'll
time?
do it every single year.
Yep.
We obviously, they all have, every building and department has access to their history.
Mhm.
So it's not like we're gonna say that we're gonna be moving money around. We don't have lots of money to be moving around
Right.
anyway. However, we just want to make sure that as we look at everything, we're actually digging into the expenditures. We're not just saying that we spent general supplies last year at $500 and we're gonna carry it over
Right.
next year. We're just gonna have a little bit more detail into it. So the process is much more involved.
Dean and then Peter?
Peter, go ahead.
Okay.
Is your plan to do zero-based budgeting just a one-time thing, or are you going to do this every year?
We'll do it every year.
Okay.
Yep.
Question I have, I think as the budget begins to come to fruition, when we're ready to go, it would really be good to identify maybe 3 good solid points of instructional-based innovation type of thing, and also 2 or 3 areas where we may be having deficiency and needs. Because I think we need, and you can't communicate budgets in the kind of business manager categories that you have very well. But I think if we could find 5 to 10 what might be bullet points in which could be more effective explanation of what we're doing well and what our needs are financially, I think it would help.
Any other comments, questions? Susan?
Well, and I wondered, open enrollment is a piece of this. Not necessarily for the board, but I wonder if it would be helpful to just put those in there, because it's kind of part of what you have to do, but maybe it doesn't fit here. I mean, it's part of what you communicate with us as part of the budget process, right?
Yes. So like the preliminary numbers that we're going to be talking about
Right,
tonight.
and that's
we have
always
that-
January.
Yep, and then we need to give you a final
ones
one,
are-
and it would be May. So I will
May.
just add that to.
Yeah, open enrollment,
It's a piece of the revenue, so.
yeah. Is that okay?
Sure.
Sure, that's, we get
I
that.
mean, you're doing it, so
Yep.
I just thought then when you pull this out, and if somebody asks about open enrollment, we'll have it
Yep.
right here and they can see how it's part of the budget process.
Definitely.
Okay,
Nope, not a problem.
thanks.
Anything else?
So the rumor I hear is he's gonna start out with 0 in the original budget and then add a small amount as he get closer to the end per student.
That would be much better than what we're.
Well, that's-
Right.
that would be much better than
Right.
what.
You give him a little push
That's-
towards the presidency as something I've noticed funny back in the.
Well, whatever the reason, we'll take it.
As long as we don't go backwards.
But I heard
Right.
little like $10.
Oh, really? Not
Yeah.
even 50?
Not even 50.
I haven't heard any, so whatever.
Well, this is all speculation.
It is
Yeah.
all speculation, we'll see. Sometimes we get a preview next week at the convention, because he'll
Yeah.
speak on Friday, so.
Do we get remember there was a point where we were doing the 5-year projection and that's where we could see.
CMA, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that come in?
So
I
that
mean,
will
they
come
do
in
the
in March.
district budget
And-
forecast for the year, but do they do
That
like
will
a
add the
5-year
5-year,
forecast?
yep.
Okay,
That's when
good.
they do it.
Okay. Maybe we want to put in 5-year forecast, just so people can see that we're not just looking specifically, because we hadn't until you start doing that.
Nope, not
Just
at all.
nice, okay.
So we can add that to the page.
Anything else?
All right, and then the second one is just an informational piece, so you'll see what's coming at the next board meeting for approval. If you recall, when we approved the teacher retirement plan, Tier 3 required some borrowing of money to get everybody caught up. We're still working on the legal documentation from the legal counsel to bring back for formal approval, but we do know that we have to borrow up to about $2 million. So that process does take some time, and in order for us to be ready for when June comes, I will be bringing a resolution written by Quarles and Brady and PMA to authorize us to start moving forward with borrowing up to $2 million. And that's very similar to our borrowing process that we did with the McKinstry project. This resolution starts that 30-day petition period, so individuals, if they have questions, can put together a petition if they don't want the board to do that. Then what happens is after that 30 days, then we can actually go to the process of bidding out our bonds, selling some of those notes, and so we're ready to have the money in hand so we can distribute to whatever accounts we've chosen through the trust funds and the committee by June of this fiscal year. So none of the money will be put into any trust funds or anything like that. This is just starting that process. And the resolution that comes forth at the next board meeting will just say to borrow up to $2 million. What we'll be able to do is we continue to analyze if we see individuals that are leaving the district. We might not necessarily borrow the $2 million, it might be $1.8 million, but we don't want to exceed that $2 million based on the conversation that had been taking place at the board when we approved those retirement options.
Dean?
My understanding then is that there would be no investment of those funds until the investment plan of investment, of education, and fee disclosure will all be drafted and in place and approved.
Right, we will not put any of that money into any trust fund related to retirement.
Existing or the
Existing
potential.
or retirement until all those documentations and we.
I think that's important, that the money be in a solid
Yeah,
instrument.
but we do need to start the borrowing process.
Okay.
Well, and I just want to clarify, my recollection is that the board approved that limit, that
Mhm.
2 million limit. So now what we're doing is just building a plan within that based on the specific circumstances.
Yep. And I just don't want it to be a
I
surprise.
just thought-
Yep,
That, you know, if people hadn't been in
Gotcha.
tune that might be watching,
Yep.
they,
just don't want everybody to be
I
surprised
don't want to think
when
we're
this
doing
resolution-
it, and we didn't already, we approved it a while ago, so,
Right.
thanks.
Good point. Anyone else? All right, then we'll move along to board reports. Teacher compensation committee, Dean?
Got it. Get here, I got something to pass out. It's the old teacher in me. Here you go. A little help with this, maybe.
You can frame it. Dean will sign it for you.
I like it.
What was that?
You can sign mine.
Your archives.
I don't know what meeting it was last night that we had, but I think we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it's not really bright, but it's there. But we've had very lively meetings of late because we've introduced the money into the picture. And we're getting down to the final
I
issues
think that's when the
that
meeting was.
affect how this thing operates. We've been operating pretty much on a conceptual basis, putting the pieces in, how they fit and how it will function have been the subject, I think, of the last two meetings. We had two major issues to deal with, and issue number one dealt with the teacher ladder, compensation ladder. And it has to do with the criteria, standards, and review processes for teachers to go from step 3, which is the general professional teacher, to step 4, which is the big leap in this, to the master teacher, and step 5 is the distinguished teacher. And to what I'm reading here really will apply to both of these to some extent, although we want to deal with the master teacher first. The major questions we discussed among the committee and about 6 or 7 teacher representatives were the following: the development of final criteria and standards for passing from step 3 to step 4. We have the elements of those standards, but they've not been completely systematized. The evidence and artifacts that will be required for a teacher portfolio to promotion from professional teacher to master teacher, in other words, catalog of information that would be a minimum necessary for review of that, because this will not be something that will happen automatically. C, to go from the professional teacher, step 3, to the master teacher will require a recommendation from a review panel to the superintendent, who would make the final recommendation. That's where we are at this point. And so what we're talking about is who should be on that review panel that would evaluate the evidence and recommend to the superintendent movement from professional to master teacher. Number D is the conclusion we came to, is the number of teachers that would be allowed. Oh, another item. We also have to make this manageable not only from a review process, but from a fiscal process. So we need to have some recommendation of the number of teachers that would be allowed to advance from the professional teacher, which is step 3, to the master teacher in 2006, that will be effective in the year 2016, 2017. In other words, we'd be making that initial decisions in 2015, 2016, but the teacher would fall into that category in the following year. So what we concluded is that we need a subcommittee, and the compensation committee approved a subcommittee composed of the director of instruction, the director of special education pupil services, selected principals and teachers to make a recommendation to the superintendent on the above questions and issues, all 4 of them. The outcome to be incorporated into the final recommendation of the committee report. Okay. Did I get that right, Dan, you think?
That's exactly right.
Okay. We also dealt, that was the standards and criteria process side. The other part is the money part. It's amazing how people, as soon as you put money, dollar signs on it, people are distracted to that area. The teacher compensation committee composed of the, approved a committee composed of the director of instruction, pupil services, and selected principal and teachers to make recommendations, superintendent. Excuse me, I'm repeating. Number 2, we want to deal with 4 areas of the salary plan. 1, the annual stipend or amount for Monona Grove School District approval for advanced degrees. The teacher compensation plan, as it is today, and I would expect it to be at the end, is that we will be rewarding teachers for advanced degrees for movement between steps, but there will not be the typical rewarding for degrees in the columns that they traditionally have had. But we'd also have some kind of annual or triennial, I should have triennial in there as well, I think, amount that would, excuse me. The second one, the annual stipend for teacher leadership positions. We have 5 steps on the ladder, and a 6th step, which could apply to anyone in steps 3, 4, or 5, would be people who would exercise functions as teacher leaders. We presently call those TOSAs, and we have them operating in our elementary schools, and we have, what, 1 or 2 in the district office? Is that correct? One in the district office. And those will be considered as other positions in the district. Then we have to consider the salary advance guidelines within each of the 5 steps on the career ladder. So, and this we've tended to call the years of service type of factor. So would there be an increase? We've been talking about every 3 years and so forth on that. And then finally, the salary placement guidelines for promotion between steps. So we have the within steps and between steps. We've talked about these in general terms, but we have to get them finalized and priced, so forth. And finally, teacher compensation urged the superintendent, business manager, director of human relations to recommend proposed salaries and salary ranges for each of the questions and issues based on comparability, comparable school districts, which we adopted earlier, and principles that will attract and retain teachers and are sustainable budgetarily. So those are the 3 essential dollar types of criteria. We also establish what we think, this is hopeful, final meeting dates. To have 5 of those is ambitious, I think. We'll meet March 5th to receive the report of the above two committees. They promise they'll get their work done. And March 11th, that should not be March 1st, but March 11th, a preliminary full report and discussion at the school board committee of the whole will be planned. And then between March 12th and March 27th, Dan and others will make presentations at listening sessions at all 5 schools. We'll present this, lay it out at all 5 schools. And then April 14th, the Teacher Compensation Committee will meet again to consider any amendments or changes and a final vote based on information that we've received from the listening sessions primarily. And hopefully that will lead a few days later to final approval by the board on April 22nd, which I'm informed will be in time to make sure that salaries for next year will be able to be put in letters to teachers in a timely fashion. Have I touched the bases?
Sure have.
Any questions?
Jared, or any comments? Or Andrew? Any comment? Any questions? Susan?
Dean, would you just clarify again? So the salary advance guidelines within steps relates to years of service?
Right now, that's the way we've dealt with them, years of service, and it's, the committee has preliminarily recommended a once every 3 years at that point. And, but I think that could be reviewed for more, greater frequency or the amount too, so some combination of that. We have to try to make year of service rewarding. We have to make it competitive, but we have to make it fiscally responsible and sustainable over time. And that's also the thing we have to do between those big steps. We're hoping that we're able to make the step, particularly the step from 3 to 4, a substantial one to really reward the master teachers, but we don't quite know where that will be. We have some numbers that have been thrown out, and so we think it'll be somewhere around those numbers, but we've got to add them all up.
Yep.
I think one of the benefits, not so necessarily in the process that the committee has followed, but our consultant on this that we had at the beginning, but we have not really worked with in terms of our process, has been able to, and you can elaborate on this, Jared, please, if I missed the main point, but I think has been able to get every teacher fitting within this structure.
Yes.
So that we'll be able to retain that database and be able to manipulate the variables within that. Is that a fair statement?
That's very correct.
So you don't have to do it all by hand?
Correct.
Okay. Any questions?
So the salary advance guidelines within steps, so the only thing within the steps are the years of service?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe under C, if this is going to be a public document, you want to just put within steps, comma, years of service, so that people know what, I mean, I didn't know what that meant.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it just
Yeah,
explains
that's
it better, and
I think
then
that's a good point.
the salary advance guidelines for promotion between steps,
That's not a year of service.
no, those are those other things that you're titling professional to master teacher to.
Right. Each of the colors on our
okay, so
career ladder
maybe-
will have a different
Maybe what you,
minimum and maximum, so to speak.
and how many steps on the career?
5.
5, okay, so maybe you want to put the salary advancement guidelines for promotion
Between the 5
between the
steps.
5 steps on the career ladder. Then people know exactly what you're looking for here.
I'll make these modifications. If you have a couple of more, I'll send these in to Dan, and he can get them up online if you'd like.
In board docs for the
On
meeting,
board
because
docs.
we're not at the point where we're putting these
And
out
not
otherwise,
public,
so just,
no.
well,
Right.
it was just in board docs.
Right.
Because I think all of it, without looking at the whole thing, is probably hard for people to grasp if they're just listening. I mean, we were kind of immersed in it, but.
Yeah, that's
So I
why.
think when the final product comes out, and that's why we actually chose to put off the date for the listening sessions until it's more final, and we can have because it's hard to figure out how to put it down on paper so it's clear. And we're obviously not at that
There are
point.
too many moving parts right now.
Right.
Right.
So this is by far not, this is just a report of where we are now.
The other,
You were there. Any questions?
well, I have one more.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay. I just had a question about the committee and the structure of that under current policy, because, we're kind of in transition on that. I just want to make sure we're doing that within policy guidelines.
Yeah, this is a subcommittee of a committee. It's a working group. It's not even really, it's a working group of the.
So maybe
So
you
it's
don't want to
totally fine.
call it a committee, because then it's going to get involved in public notice.
Let's
and-
call
Not
it a
really,
working
it's
group.
staff,
Yeah.
working group, good point, call it a working group.
Okay,
And
I
it's
just
just a
don't
staff
want there to be a
working group.
misconception that
Right,
we should be adhering to public
right.
agendas
I
and
don't want to
stuff.
cross the threshold of policy.
Yeah, notice there are no board members on this. This is it's a working.
It's a working group.
Staff.
Yeah.
And you basically assigned a project, and you've suggested certain people be involved, but the superintendent would, okay.
Good point. Thank you.
Okay, because it does sound more like you formed a subcommittee, so I think that's helpful to just
I
add
did
that
call it a
clarity.
committee
Yeah.
in here, didn't I?
We'll have to train ourselves, a working group. That's a good point.
Yeah, yeah.
It is a working group. I should.
The team. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you. Next is the policy committee, Susan?
Okay, so the policy committee met on January 7th. Administration presented a revision to current board policy 345.6, which is posted in board docs. Graduation requirements that would add a .5 financial literacy graduation requirement and expand total elective credits from 8 to 8.5. The actual policy with the change in it is included in board docs. Administration also presented the current board policies regulating purchasing quotations and bids for discussion within the committee relating to possible changes to the current policies relating to purchases requiring quotations or bids and limitations and board approval. Several possible revisions will be discussed by the committee in February. Discussion is continuing, and Dan can add to that if he has anything else he'd like to add. The committee continued discussion on Neola Series 0000, which are the bylaws, and effectively relates to current board policy series, the 100 series. And many thanks to Susan Fox, who has actually gone through and identified and then asked the other committee members to validate that. Anything that appears to be a substantive change. So there will be identification of that as we go forward to the Neola bylaw section. And then administration will present the revised board policy 345.6 for its first read. I want to notice that there is a recommendation from Andrew Bedell. There was a connection with a $10,000 grant connected to this requirement in adding this class. And there also is included cost related to the addition of this curriculum.
Yeah, just one correction, and it was just a matter of misspeaking. The addition of financial literacy as a required .5 credit actually reduces the number of electives from 8.5 to 8, because currently, because it takes the place of an elective. Minor, but if people are listening, I just want to make sure they got that correct. It's in the board deck, so correctly so.
Thank you, thank you.
Yep. Okay,
And the
any,
cost, I
You're right,
guess.
you're exactly right, and that's shown in the policy, I'm
And
sorry.
also the additional cost will be covered by the grant, so it's no.
Not
Not
exactly,
entirely.
not exactly, and that's why Paul included additional information with that. The grant is, and Dan can speak to that more specifically. One of the things the committee asked them to do was to bring forward some general thoughts about the cost, because that wasn't within the committee structure. So there will be materials for the class And it's still, I'll let you speak to that, moderately unknown about staffing.
Actually, we do have a estimate. So it is on board docs, we added. You can see the document, the summary for the financial literacy course. And so we estimate approximately $8,100 for textbook and material. So that will be paid for generally by the grant. So the only thing that's a little bit unknown is the staffing. The staffing is a little uncertain because clearly there'll be more students taking business ed courses, and so the number of FTEs in business ed could go up. That means they're not taking something else. So how that plays out, it doesn't necessarily mean a 1-to-1 ratio. It's that way every year when we look at the elective. So that's something we'll take a look at, but that'll be part of the staffing plan. But as far as actual materials, the grant should pretty much cover that.
How often do we have to update those textbooks?
I'll let you answer that.
Typically, we do a review every 5 to 6 years of a particular curricular area. But with more and more digital content, that becomes more fluid going forward. So the estimate here that you have is for a textbook series that's recommended by one of our staff members who's been involved in teaching the elective class before, has helped develop the proposal for graduation credit. So typically, yeah, I would say 5 to 6 years is.
Because I would think financial literacy is more of a living class than a science or a history class or something like that. So.
Well, I think that's why you constantly monitor it,
Uh-huh.
and you look to, there's a textbook that has a piece of it, and then, as I said, other resources that can be flexible as you go through.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's one thing, is that our teachers are not reliant on just textbooks. I mean, they are constantly finding other materials. And so
The textbook is a piece of it.
the textbook is a piece, but it is a piece. That's not an important piece, but they always supplement.
But this was a unique class to
Right.
we don't
Yeah,
do with it.
yeah,
Science in its pure form is also a living.
correct.
Well, and we discussed a couple things in committee, if that might be helpful for you to know. And actually, the research is a little variable about showing that there is a very clear increase in financial knowledge once you get done. But as it becomes a course of interest, and more schools are requiring it, and in fact the state is supporting that we do this through the grant process, they're doing more research. And when you actually go in there, Dan had seen a UW research project that
Indicated that there was, I'm not sure how it was measured exactly, but
Positive
yeah, it
correlation.
was. Positive.
well, and again, remember it's a USA Today article, but it actually quoted another study of like 62,000 first-year college students. And, again, Susan's comment to that was, yeah, well, as a high school student where you're still kind of living at home, it wasn't as big a deal, and maybe you didn't manifest that you'd learned that much. By the time you're in college and you're out on your own, you're going back and putting it together better. But it did show first-year college students required to take a financial literacy course in high school are significantly more likely than their peers who didn't take the class to be financially responsible. We'll have to see how that goes. Lionel's shaking his head. But there were a study of 65,000 college students. They obviously didn't get my 3, but.
Well, and I think at least from the research that I looked at, it said timing is part of it. So the fact that we're looking at it senior year, because it has to be offered at a time when kids are actually starting to think about that kind of thing, because if they're not, it's not very relevant. They might not get as much out of it. And it's also, and some colleges are doing this now because kids are even more ready to hear it there. So it's a piece, and as Paul said, we have a lot of classes that offer kids information that they may come back to later. And it's just one more piece, I think, to further their educations. And it's something we can look at too down the road and see whether we think.
Well, and I think, again, Paul, as principal of the high school, has an excellent document in board docs that covers some positives and some questions, and but shows strong support. Paul, do you want to speak to that? I mean, you looked at this fairly seriously and had thought about it for a while.
I'm happy to answer any questions, sir.
Yeah. Do people have other questions about it, or otherwise, I don't know that we need to, this is just for discussion tonight, it'll be on the agenda for approval at the next meeting, so. Anyone have any questions? Okay. Good. All right, so Susan, anything else? You finished?
Yeah, Dan, was there anything
No.
else you wanted to add about any of the administrative?
No.
No,
I think we're good.
we're scheduled, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then we will move on to discussion items, and the first item is the 2015-16 open enrollment recommendations.
Okay, I'll introduce it, and then Jared can go through some of the documents that he put together, for the board's consideration. So annually, the board in January must approve the number of open enrollment seats for the following school year. And so tonight is discussion only, and then we'll come back and ask for board approval again at the next regular meeting. And so as you recall, historically, at least the last couple of years, we have opened up a limited number of seats because of space concerns, particularly the bottleneck at Glacial Drumlin School. And so we've looked at opening up seats, some at 4K, where we know we can handle those each year. And then again, at 9th grade, we have space in the high school. And so our preliminary recommendation is something very similar, again, to this, to that. One thing to keep in mind about the process, whatever you approve in January, those are the numbers that have to stay in place, and then we have our policy that guides how the lottery system works when we get the applications and so on. And then when we notify the parents, the open enrollment window runs from February 2nd to April 30th. Then we go through and select the open seats, and then we notify the parents that were not selected. One thing that we did learn is that the board could come back in the summer after we've done those notifications and then reevaluate, do we have any additional seats that we could open up? And then at that point, you could approve additional ones and we could, go through the waiting list. We found last year that one of the things that we did that in May, which we thought made sense because then we knew what we had for space. What we found from DPI is they continually to rewrite the rules about the procedures, is that they want us to do all of our notifications first, and so really we needed to wait until June to do that after the notifications, and then we can reevaluate. We certainly would like to let the parents know sooner than later, but on the other hand, by doing that, we jeopardize following the rules and losing appeals in that case. So what we can get into that more in that spring. That would be the general idea, that we're going to have to be fairly conservative now because we really, based on what we know about space availability, but then we certainly do want to come back and take a look at this when we have a better idea of how many students we actually do have, particularly the 4K and 5K, as those kids are continuing to register new to the district. So that's the general piece. So Jared, if you want to kind of take through the documents and
I apologize, my computer decided to lock up, so I'll go back to sort of old fashioned. I'll point out what you have.
Do you have handouts?
I don't have any handouts.
Well, you can get
Do you have it on your?
Yeah.
So the process that we walked through in identifying the 10 spots at 4K and the 40 spots at the 9th grade, and why there's no other grade level at this point, is what we do is we did have our enrollment study, which gave us a snapshot at 5-year, 10-year intervals. So it doesn't necessarily break it down how many first graders are you going to get, how many third graders, but it gives us an idea of what they project for enrollment. So what we've always done is we've taken the second Friday counts in January, which actually was the first Friday we were back, so last Friday, and we take whoever's enrolled at that time when we roll it forward, and then we analyze the number of sections that we have. So when you look at the sheet that says 2005, 2016 projected enrollment in sections as of January 9th with proposed new open enrollment. So when we're looking at that, we're saying, okay, this year we have 7 sections of 2nd grade at Cottage Grove. When we roll the first graders that are this year up to 2nd grade, what does that do to our class size? We have board policy that says class size range and guidelines, and then we have a class size goal. So I met with Superintendent Olson, and we walked through each of those sections and say, first of all, are any of our sections that we currently have with our roll forward over our class size guideline? If it is, that's an automatic, we have to add a section for it, so an additional teacher there. And then we take the second look and we look at the class size goal. Are we able to get to that class size goal? Because the class size goal is ideally where we want to be at, and that also gives us some cushion in case we do have move-ins over the summer without trying to exceed our class size guidelines. So there are times where we are going to be right within our goal, and there are going to be times that we might be, if our goal is 20, we might be at 21. But if we add an additional section, that would take us out of our class size guideline. And it would put, so if our class size guideline was 17 to 24, if we added an additional section, that might take us down to 16 kids per class. And obviously, it'd be nice to have smaller class size, but when we're also looking with a certain dollar of money in our budget, we have to be, aware of where that's at. If we do have areas where our class size goal is not being met, we'll look at that and say, do we want to accept some open enrolled students? The other part that we need to look at is building capacity. And is that child in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, are they going to get to Glacial Drumlin and then eventually to the high school? One of the things that we're working with is our long-term facilities committee. That will also address in the future potential open enrollment. But right now, what we're seeing is we saw 104 students residents grow this year. We're anticipating similar results for next year. And so when we look at that, that's going to put us potentially adding a number of sections by rolling those kids forward. In addition to that, if we accepted more kids, our buildings would be filling up, and also we would have a bottleneck at Glacial Drumlin. So those are the purposes for us of just choosing 4K and 9th grade. Once they get to 9th grade or high school, we believe in working with the high school administration, we're able to accept 40 at the freshman level. Typically, we have taken 25 to 35, and last year we took a number, we had opened up a similar number, and we didn't necessarily fill all those spots at the freshman level. However, as the year has gone, we still receive alternative open enrollment, and then we're able to place those kids at grade 9 if those applications come in. That in the long term, if you look at the projected enrollment cast forward method, this is just looking at the next 7 years, and that's just taking our current kindergarten enrollment and we just work it through and it carries it out for 7 years. So if you just look at Glacial Drumlin, this year we have about 852 students there. Next year, without adding 100 additional students, we're looking at 868, and that's just by moving our 4th graders that are at Cottage Grove up and our 5th graders that are coming over and joining those 5th graders in 6th grade. So we're seeing that building is going to 868. When we look at the other buildings, part of our facilities committee is to actually analyze what is the true capacity of our buildings. I know that we've talked about capacity before, where we believe it is, but there's different types of capacity when you're looking at building. Is a chemistry science lab truly being able to hold 30 kids? Well, not if there's not enough space to do that. At a traditional classroom, you might be able to do that. So part of our study that we'll do is actually get an academic use study and capacity for our buildings. So we'll be able to tie that back to more of our enrollment as we look forward to open enrollment in the future. But right now we're looking at, about that 850 to 875 is that range that we're looking at for Glacial Drumlin, and 868 is, we're pushing it there. And then as you go out to the 3rd year, the 4th year, those numbers start to level off, but that's not reflective of any new students that we potentially could get next year. This is just truly a cash forward approach to looking at enrollment. And based on the enrollment that we got from Vanderwall and Associates, we do expect to see 100 students to continue to enroll in the district on an annual basis, give or take. But we don't necessarily know where those students are going to be at. Is it going to be 1st grade? Is it going to be 7th grade? Is it going to be 9th grade? Because they lump them together and they're based that information on current household and birthing rates and move-out rates and move-in rates based on what's happening in the current markets. So,
Jeff, Dean, and then Susan.
It's not exactly, I don't know if it's exactly we're supposed to talk about it, but I know we were going to talk about a plan for next year when 7th and 6th and 7th move up, or 5th and 6th move up.
Yeah.
Because in September the rubber hits the road there. So,
Yes.
do we,
That'll be part of that.
Yeah,
Well,
this-
part of that.
This spring, the board will see the plan about where those kids are gonna go as far as the additional sections that are
Using the
needed.
building, Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, I was noticing that too.
I know we're
Pods,
tic-tac
problem
and
pods,
tic-tac.
yeah.
yeah, so Renee has a proposal,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
we'll bring that forward, yeah.
Dean?
How much revenue were the numbers that would take in an open enrollment? How much revenue will that generate for next year?
Well, we're anticipating about $250,000 or a little less. We have about 20 seniors that are open enrolled right now that will be leaving us. So when you net that stuff out, we're looking at about $250,000. And that's based on the numbers that we have right now for open enrollment. When the state budget comes out, that's also where they set that number at too. So that number could increase and we could see some additional revenue there, or that number could decrease and we could see some less.
I realize this is probably not a good budgeting practice. We're caught between revenue generation through open enrollment and serving families and kids who want to come into the district. But when we add these things, we create pressure on class size
Yes.
and school size, and that's particularly the class size issues. And I would suggest that somehow we set that $250,000 aside to address class size reduction and that sort of thing. So it's simply not paying for other things other than instruction
Right.
and
Well-
teaching and learning environments and that sort of thing. And because I think the concern eventually is we're starting to push this to the limit, I think, from what I hear your report. It changes every year, I know, but the stress on revenue under the current world of school finance, it's very tempting to take the next kid in that will bring us several $1,000s over and above what we expect. But it also creates pressure on class size, school size, and other instructional factors that deal with the quality variable as well. So, you know, it's so when it comes around, I would hope not to hear the answer from you to say we have no money for class size reduction. I'd rather have you said we use $250,000 to reduce class size. You follow what I'm trying to drive at?
And then that's one of the things too, is Dan and I discussed this when we looked at 40 students at the high school. That potentially is 2 additional teachers. And so as we look at those types of things, and if we need to add additional staff at the high school, those would be the resources that we would utilize. But that's why we're also not seeing open enrollment at any of those other grade levels, because there's a point where adding 1 or 2 or 3 students, yes, we're getting the revenue and it helps the overall budget, but it's not helping that grade level if it's pushing us to the max. You definitely need to, if you're going to be focusing, taking that budget money and using it for a straight class size reduction, you need to be looking at one specific grade level, and that's what we would do, and that's why we're looking at just at the freshman
It'd just be
level.
nice to say we're using the additional revenue
Oh,
for
definitely.
instructional improvement.
Yeah, and I think we can say that. I think, because if you look at the number of open enrollment students we have now, for about every 10 students, the revenue generated would pay for a teacher. So if on average, we have a teacher teaching 20, it more than pays for itself. And that's what we did last year. We opened additional seats for 9th grade. The additional revenue more than paid for the teachers we had to hire, which meant class size reduction elsewhere. So you're right, we don't necessarily have it as a line item in the budget that way, but I can assure you that if we stop taking open enrollment, class sizes are gonna go up, because there's not gonna be enough revenue, and we're gonna have to increase it. So it is absolutely
As long as
going that
those
way.
10 teachers don't have classes of 35.
Right, I mean, it's where you just person, yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of it's a hard balancing act.
yeah.
Susan?
Well, and just to, again, take it the next step in relation to Dean's concerns about the class sizes continue to be serious concerns of mine. And I just think this kind of material that you're using as a standard format for us now is incredibly helpful. And understanding it's a lot of a guess, but to be able to see this is incredibly helpful. The other thing I want to do is remind the board and the community that we are still operating under increased class size guidelines due to a financial decision made by the board several years ago at the middle school and the high school. So even though you may look at this, at these class size guidelines right here for the high school, I think our goal continues to be to return to the class size guidelines that we originally adhered to, we believed in, and we advocated for. And we felt the research supported. So it's just a thought as we go forward. So that's why it's really important to be able to see how close you are. And then, you know, that's why it's important to use the goal as well. So I just wanted to mention that too, because we are still operating under those financially increased class size guidelines. Then the other thing I wanted to just validate, because I know that you do this and I want to make sure the community is aware of this, is that we aren't just looking at class size guidelines, we're looking at building capacity, particularly in Glacial Drumlin. We have 1 gym in that building, and we have 850 students in that building, which originally, when that referendum came forward, was stated by the architects as the capacity. So we're sitting there, and what we have to do is not just look at classroom space and how many kids we can put in a classroom and what we believe in terms of learning, but we have to look at how many kids can you put in a gym and in the IMC for lunch, and how many kids can you continue to pass. So that's why we went back and specifically changed the policy to make it very clear, because the statutes allows you to do that, but that is a factor that we look at. So I just wanted to, because I know that's been a big deal for Jared all along, understanding that. And I appreciate that as a long-term facility planning committee, those are things you're going to look at.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. That's what the facility planning committee is gonna look
Right,
at.
that's
Those-
exactly great.
Taking all those
That's
things
exactly.
I think
into
that's
account. So
And those numbers could change.
there's no
Right.
need to, I guess, keep beating on it. They're gonna
Right.
look at those things and make plans accordingly for the future. So I think those issues will be looked at, Dean chairing that committee, and those things will be taken into account.
I think that'd be great, because we did have a superintendent who stood up and said that capacity is 1,000 students.
And there are people who remember that, so we have to undo that.
There are. So, again, that's why I
That's
think
right.
it's great
That's not-
that we are going to have this
Right,
committee, and
yeah.
we're going to have people that are dedicated and committed to putting that information together, looking at all the pieces.
Right.
That's
Then
great.
again, like we've always said though, but we made these decisions, some of these decisions,
Mhm.
when we start talking about the goals
Go ahead,
and
Pete.
the guidelines, we made these decisions a while back due to budget constraints. And even though we think we're no longer
Yeah.
under budget constraints, we still kind of are. So
Right.
whenever we start
Okay.
talking about we want to go back, there better be a lot of money
Yeah.
Coming
coming
in.
into the district to where we can do that.
Right.
So it's not like we just want to say, oh yeah, let's go back to the old plan and, write a check and we're going to be fine. We don't have a plan to get there to financially support it, so we can't.
But I think you have to really commend this board for having seriously looked at this, and business services and superintendent who give you a document who makes that part of your decision. Because it is a factor. If it is, you have the information in front of you to help you make the decision.
Dean?
I think you have 1 gym out there, but I believe the gym has 2 teaching stations.
That's 4, I think. actually.
What, 2 or 4?
But that's what you're going to study. That's why
Right,
we've
that's-
challenged
yeah,
you to study.
that's part of the
that. We
facility
appreciate
But
plan.
that.
I'm just saying, I think that, I think that the comfort at Winnequa School is that you have 2 gyms that are separated by a wall and that sort of thing. But most gymnasiums built in schools today are separated by a netting area, and they have teaching stations. So I think that it's important that we not say we have 1 gym, because we have 2 teaching stations at least there. And also, I think it would be important as we go through this facility studies, not to resurrect the referendum of 2006 with statements of who said what, when, where, and why, because I'm sure they range wildly from truth to absolute falsity, and it will not help us. It's not going to help us in 2016.
I
That's
think
why we've
that's-
challenged you to do that, and we appreciate that you're going to take the time and effort to do that.
And I think people need to have the confidence that this
Yep.
committee will do that, because
Yes.
that's clearly,
Yes.
that's a big piece of what they'll be looking at.
That's
so
exactly
it's,
right.
yeah,
It's a great approach.
right. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so we will be approving these numbers at the next meeting.
Yes.
Then we will move ahead to the strategic planning proposal.
Okay, I just had a very short summary, you know, in the board docs. As you recall, this board has talked about the strategic planning process now at several meetings. At our last meeting, you saw a proposal for a facilitator to create that plan, and there was discussion and basically about, could you come back with another proposal, or what are the other options that we have besides the group that we had brought forward? And so prior to, you know, making that recommendation with that particular group, I had also, you know, looked at other options, and I think I reported that we really have three options. You've got education groups like the Studer group that was mentioned that do this sort of thing. You've got other private entities that do strategic planning that aren't necessarily education related, but can do it for any organization. And then specifically in the education field, you've got educators who do that sort of facilitator. Typically, those educators are administrators, superintendents, retired superintendents, you know, that sort of thing that help other districts, you know, through that process. When we look at the fiscal part of it, that's certainly the least expensive alternatives to find individuals to do that do this as kind of not a profession, but on the side. And so that's the approach that I took, to look at, okay, who are some people that we know in the area or in the state that could do this work that would be a good fit for our district. And I did talk to two individuals since that time. I don't have a formal proposal tonight because that's still in the works, but I did give you the names of those individuals, and I think I can state those publicly. Jack Linehan is a retired superintendent, spent most of his career in the Shorewood School District in the east side of Milwaukee. He has been on the faculty at Cardinal Stritch for the last 10 or so years in their doctoral program for administration. Jack is someone that I've known for a while, and we had a lengthy discussion over break and to talk about not only the process that he's familiar with, that he's used with other school districts, but also our situation here in Monona Grove and what our history has been in strategic planning, as well as the concerns that were raised at the last board meeting with regard to how our stakeholders are going to be involved and you know, and who's involved with the decision making and so on. And because of his extensive experience and done this sort of work for a number of years in a number of different districts, I am very confident and comfortable that he would be the right person to lead that process. You know, that we need to put that together. I think it is important that the board understand that the final result of this strategic plan is going to look very similar no matter who the facilitator is. This is our plan. The facilitator doesn't write it. All they do is bring the groups together to gather information. It's still us that write it, you know, but that is the important piece, I think, that was made loud and clear about, you know, the perception and who is involved, you know, with that, and I feel very confident that Jack will do a great job of leading through those, particularly the other you know, non-administrative stakeholders, our teachers, community members, and there's a number of different approaches. The approach that Studer had recommended was different focus groups. His preference and recommendation would be probably more larger group, bring everyone together in the room at the same time. But that's something, the details that we want to work out yet. Then the second part of that is, once we have that strategic plan, we mentioned the last one, it stopped at the strategies. We followed through with actions and so on at the building level, where my preference would be that those actions are actually in writing as part of it as well, but then we do have to follow through as to make sure that we are meeting, you know, how we're measuring our goals. And Jack's recommendation is that that's not something that that he would recommend doing, that's not his area of expertise, that we do have a second person that would do that follow through with that. And we talked about a number of individuals that do that sort of work, and the first person on the list that we both came up with, someone that he has worked with as well, Joanne Sternke, is the present superintendent at Pewaukee. She's also on the faculty with them at Cardinal Stritch, and they work together on a lot of projects. And so I did talk to Joanne about whether she would be available or interested in working in that capacity, or other people that she might be able to recommend, and she is very interested in working with us. And that's not actually writing the strategic plan, that's the follow-through part, about working with our administrators and teachers on their PDSAs and you know, writing the goals and the measurement pieces and so on. That's the same thing that the district did do 3 years ago with Matthew Fail. He not only facilitated the writing of the plan, but also worked with the administrative team for the next year, on the follow-through part. So the follow-through is really important that we have that as well, and they would be kind of working on it too. So again, this is where I'm at right now as to what I think is the best plan for how we'll develop it. I'm going to be meeting with both individuals again next week down at the school board convention to talk more detail about specifics about how we would work, the two of them would work together and so on. We're okay on a timeline. As much as we want to move this forward, realistically, if we can start doing the planning process and bring the stakeholders in March, we're in good shape. And ideally, what we want is to have the final action plans done, by June, by the time we leave for summer. So I'll be bringing more information to the board, but that's where I'm at, right now.
Got a lot of work between now and June. With building, because we're going to be
Yes.
finished with that building. 'Cause
We do, yes. So any questions on what I've reported on or the?
Let me just compare it, if I could, to the Studer plan.
Sure.
Had a phase of having focus groups and, like you described, and, or general meetings and that
Mhm.
sort of thing, identify goals and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? And you're proposing, I'll call that phase one.
Mhm.
That would be Linehan.
Correct.
And then to compare it, the Studer group had developing a strategic planning committee, a smaller group to devise and put together a plan, and you're proposing that phase to be Sternke.
Nope, that's still the phase of writing the plan, so that's still Linehan. Her part is after it's written, now going out with the PDSA work and working on the actions.
Okay, so Linehan will take us through what would have been Studer 1 and 2. And then Sternke would be helping implement it within the district.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have just one more.
Okay.
Have you given any more thought of how you would involve staff?
We've had quite a long discussion about it, and those are the details we still need to work out, but absolutely, they'll be part of that planning process. Like I said, the difference is, I think we would settle on, instead of having them as a separate focus group, one large group with the staff and community and everyone all in the same room together.
I want to thank you for responding to the board's concerns about this and finding alternatives which are local, and I think the two people you've identified, I know them both, and I think they're good choices. I just wanted to have you consider strong,
Sure.
more intimate involvement of faculty and staff to build team.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I also feel very comfortable that this is a really good fit for our district, and I think it is worth noting, again, I don't have an actual proposal, but it will be significantly less cost.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Then we are on future agenda items, and you did all get the calendar reports. I don't know if anyone had any additional things they wanted to add, or?
I guess it wouldn't be good if I put some things.
Sure.
You can do that.
I was saying it probably wouldn't be a good idea if I had something. Seeing that I
Had
won't
a
be able to
big
get it.
workload and get out of town.
Raises for
Right.
everyone.
That's right.
I was just
Blow us
asking
up.
Jessica
Well-
what she thought I should do with your signs.
Yeah. You can have them as a moment.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
You
One
might
of
want
one of the
So
things
sweet.
I still have some concern of, even though I won't be around, is still the bus and transportation. I still think we need some more follow-up, even if it's at the end of the school year, where we need to look at a continuous improvement plan on, go back, look at what happened with this bus and transportation throughout this year, and what's going to be done to improve it. Because I don't think we can go into another year like this and still have some of the same concerns going forward. So I guess that's one of the things I'd like to see.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like the board to look at.
No,
That makes sense.
and that absolutely is something that Jared's been working on, and yeah.
I would support having that be further discussion, just because I do have an awareness that at Winnequa School, and I know you know about this, they've actually sent teachers over to meet and work with the drivers at
Mhm.
Nelson. So again, looking at things that different people are doing that are working, that you want to talk about with us and with the community in terms of things that you'd like to do to improve or different way to do it.
Jessica?
Yeah, I guess I would support hearing a report about that, but just for what it's worth, I heard nothing but glowing reviews in recent months.
Good.
Yeah.
Nothing but glowing reviews. I think that it was a little touch and go at the beginning, to be sure, but it seems like it's definitely straightened out, but
Certainly.
it's worth getting a report about.
Right.
And I do think, again, getting that feedback that, and they may have done this at other schools, this is the only one I'm aware of because people were talking about it. But again, working directly with those drivers, with students, showing support, working with the students that might need additional help in that bus process. So again, doing an integrated approach with a private company in terms of behavior on the buses and in fact, teachers getting on the bus and saying, I want to let you know, I'll ride this if that will help. And again, I'm just not aware of what the other schools have done, but I was quite impressed with that initiative and that work.
Yeah, that's very good.
Okay.
They just changed their route a little bit and didn't tell anybody. And the bus driver said, well, we were going to send out an email.
Right.
So to me, it seems like they aren't trying really hard, but
I guess
so I
that's
would
the
like to hear
type
that
of thing.
report,
That's-
for sure.
Yeah,
I'm with-
so I think
yeah.
that goes to the point that we need a comprehensive kind of
Right.
look at where things are and what's been done this year.
What was
What
good,
more
what
needs to be
was-
done, what was good, what were some problems, are there
But-
still some problems? That's basically
Are
what
we
it
going to
is.
do that with all of our vendors? I thought we were going to do a sub-report on how that's worked out for us. And
I think we may hear something about that later.
we may or we will. I mean, there's a difference.
If you requested.
Yeah,
Well,
I've requested it like numerous times.
I said may because you just said something,
Right.
yeah, you can request it. We can
Right.
put that.
But I mean, I think any outside vendor we hire, we should have a review, at least yearly review on how they're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly internally, we're doing that, and it goes back to the board reports. And so, without question, that'd be fine.
Okay, anything else? All right, future meetings, long-range plan.
Would you put
committee.
on, and I don't know when this will come forward, just a report out, and probably in the superintendent's report, about the MGEF grants? Just because normally I give that in my report, but you were on that committee, so I think it might be
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah, and by next month, we'll have as you know, we just had
The
half of them.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
we have to
yes.
wait till they're all,
Yeah.
I think, all
I just
more
meant
appropriate.
future agenda.
Right, yeah, we always get that.
Okay.
We dance around it a lot, and I know, we've discussed it a little bit, but have we talked about relooking at our class size guidelines? I mean, we did that quite a few years ago, and I understand the budget implications, but I also understand the research, and I just don't think it would hurt to look at it again.
I guess I might want to see more input from other board members, whether they want to do that, because I have my own thoughts about it. Would you
No,
give
my comment would be if we start seeing a significant shift in where the budget is going, then that is the time to review that.
And what
Right,
does it mean looking at it?
Well, yeah, looking at it, I mean, what would we,
See differently.
yeah. So I haven't seen any, I haven't personally seen an indication we have much option there right now. And that's why I think Peter's comment, I personally be more aligned with that, but I don't know what the rest of you think.
Just as a footnote on that, though, I was
Yeah.
disappointed in some of the discussion around the staffing time, in which we're readily willing to accept optimal class sizes for satisfactory maximums. There was
Well, we did, we had made it a priority to look at high school class size guidelines, and we did bring down all the academic areas. We did hire 4 additional FTEs for that purpose. I didn't change our guidelines, we just tried to reduce the numbers because we had too many that were starting to go over. So we've monitored our own guidelines. That's a little bit different issue than what you're talking about, which is revisit going from 30 back to 26.
Well, see, I can see optimal as being something we can accept in September or August or September. When we're putting together a staffing plan, we ought to be looking at our goals
Right.
You follow me? You follow the
Right,
difference?
right.
I see the
Sure.
crisis need
Sure.
to accept something at the optimal
Sure.
level. I forget, I think that's the word
And it
that we
appeared-
have in it, but I think that we ought to be looking at our target goals, which were less than that discussion.
But it appeared to me that they did do that in this document. I mean, when I see
Yeah,
the
yeah,
places,
that-
where the places where
that you are,
they
yeah.
expanded sections on a couple of grade
Well,
levels.
we
Clearly,
came
that's why
down
I
to
did
crunch
that.
time at a lot of some of the justification is that those are acceptable because they're optimal. And they were not in the targeted areas.
Right.
Well, the board, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I would also advocate for what Dean's asking for, and, for instance, the original staffing plan included 2 additional teachers at the high school. As a board member, I was not aware that there had been a recommendation for more than that.
I don't want to
No, I'm
get into
just
the whole
saying-
past history again. I think
I
what I hear you.
understand
I think
what
your
I'm
point, yeah.
asking for is because there seems to be a little bit of pushback for what Dean's asking for. I'm saying yes, and based on our past experience, we could improve it by looking at that and seeing what the staffing would be needed. Then we can say, we don't want to add another $150,000, we can't afford it.
So let me hear, I think what I hear you saying is, what we saw them do when they looked at open enrollment was look at the goals before they decided what to accept, and in doing that, they did look at adding sections. I saw them in several different grade levels here, where there were sections added to meet those numbers, and somewhere the sections went down. So I came up with a total of 5 FTEs addition for this next year. So what you're saying is when they go to staff, you want them to take another look at, they've already done it for the elementaries and the middle school, so I don't, high school I can't tell from these sheets.
Yeah.
And we don't know that till the kids enroll and we know how many
And
kids are in what
then
classes.
September
So,
shows
well,
you all
no,
about
they
it.
do it in the spring, obviously, they'll be doing it
Yes.
soon, I guess. And so, what I think I hear both of you saying is that you would like us to look, like, not us, but staff, the administrative staff, to look at those high school classes, trying as hard as they can to get them at goals, and what would it take to do that? If there's, sometimes you face a situation where there are like 5 more kids. I mean, but if they look at the goals primarily and try to staff those sections that way, and then have some that come up higher than the goal, but within our guideline, what would it take to get closer to the goal? Would that even be feasible?
Yeah,
Is
and
what I
would-
think I hear you saying. And
and
then
would-
what would be the cost?
Yes.
And do we have that in the budget? Is there a way to budget for it? And what you hear me
Yes.
saying is not pushback so much as skepticism, because I'm sitting on that
What is
teacher
it?
compensation committee,
Right.
and we've got a lot of needs there. We've got needs with our retirement plan, we've got all these other needs, and they all come out of the same pot of money, so I'm just,
But we
so I'm
need
not
to be
seeing
able
any,
to.
I'm not seeing any relief coming down the pike.
What
as far
I'm
as-
saying, and it's up to Dean to also say it, is I'm saying I'd like to make sure we look at that as part of the pool.
Sure,
So I look at 4 high school teachers which will accomplish this based on an administrative recommendation rather than it already having been balanced. Is that,
well,
We can do the same thing with looking at the budget and just
yes,
seeing.
I'm
I mean,
agreeing.
right.
I think you're asking for a lot of extra work that,
That isn't
and
gonna-
then what are you gonna do with it?
It was
Yeah.
already
If
done.
we get all that extra work, then what are you gonna decide
My
on?
point was, it was already done. You didn't want me to rehash it.
But you can just look at what the budget is and look at what's over and say that would be 5 more teachers. Do we have the cost of 5 more teachers to add? And the answer probably is gonna be no, and then go off of that.
But you're the one who
And
asked
then,
for the
and then
2
hang
more
on for a minute,
teachers,
because Jessica has her hand up, please, Susan.
Well, and I think
which was missing.
that, if you're going to pursue that type of activity, you also need to come in hand with the things that you're going to be willing to cut.
Right.
Exactly.
That's
So,
I agree.
And I think,
Which unless we're doing that, it's a waste.
exactly.
Right.
Then we're just going
Right.
to go back to when I blacked it out. I can't even remember the year. It was so traumatic. When was that? 2010?
The big cuts, the 1.3,
Yeah.
2011?
2011.
I have that.
I mean, then we go back
prominently
to
in my-
4th grade strings and the late bus.
Right,
and et cetera,
we had
et cetera.
98 items on
I mean,
that
we
list.
all know that we want to have lower class sizes. We all do, but our hands are tied right now financially, and we know that. And as much as I would love to say, yeah, let's look and see what it would take to do that, we already know what it's gonna take. And it's gonna take huge cuts of things that have already been on the table that we were all passionately, dedicated to saving then. So I guess what's the difference?
Yeah, because I think what I hear you asking for, I mean, I think, we do let the high school kids sign up, and then we look at those numbers, and if you see some that are at the upper end, you look at, okay, is this a problem? Is there a way to reduce them? And if there is, within the budget, we do that. If it's going to be outside of it, then that's a decision for our administrators to sit down and talk about. I mean, those are building principals, sit down and work with their staff on that. I mean, I know that Paul makes decisions within his departments. If there are going to be a few classes larger than others, which level should that be? I mean, they do accommodate that. So it isn't, I don't think it's correct to say that we just willy-nilly don't even pay attention to the goals anymore. I think they look at all these numbers, but there just isn't a lot of flexibility.
We're asking that we get a feel for the recommended staffing based on sizes, then we can put that in the budget pool. That's all we're asking for. It's not about willy-nilly or anything else. We just all we want to do is take this sheet and look at the numbers based on the recommendation from the principal.
Which we pretty much do every year, I think.
We
Okay,
didn't
never mind.
do it this year, but I don't want to rehash it because it can be better.
I think I'm not understanding exactly what you're
We'll
asking.
tell you
Yes.
again when we get there.
Yeah,
Really-
sounds good.
Are we?
I started
sure
that, but I was referring to looking at some of these
You're-
grade school ones.
Right.
Where we have average class
And those
size
we've done-
over goal,
Right.
which, and I think goal pushes it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
As a data-driven district, and we want to lower the opportunity gap, the achievement gap. We know that lower class sizes does that, and then, so
That would
I
be another
understand where,
discussion, right,
I understand the crunch we're in, but I'm just saying, do we just accept it, or do we at least think of other options?
So you're asking for it. Now, keep in mind, we never did anything with the elementary guidelines. Those have stayed the same for years. The goal and the max have been the same for many years.
Yeah.
We didn't touch those during the budget cuts. It was just middle school and high school. So I think I hear you saying you would like, maybe as part of a committee, the whole discussion,
Maybe it's building
priorities
facility.
of whether we want to set that as a higher
Right.
priority over some other programs, perhaps,
right.
and looking at cutting other programs.
Because when you get 24, 25, 26 kids in a grade school class, that is a lot of kids in a grade school.
And I guess then I would want a thumbs up from the board if that's a discussion you want to have, because that is a different kind of discussion than we've had in a long time, and it would,
And that's what,
and that
because
is
it
the
hasn't
only,
been
that
addressed in a
is,
very long time.
well, right, and that is the only way we could reduce those class sizes
Right.
further would be to make reductions somewhere else. And so if we were to decide this is a priority for us in this district to have, I'm just going to I'm not even going to throw a figure out because that's dangerous. Then build a plan to get there. I mean, that might even come up in the strategic plan. I don't know. I'm
Right.
just
Or
thinking off the top of my head.
yeah, but I just.
Right, right. I'm
I'm
just
not
trying
saying
to
let's go and hire
get a
10
clear idea of
teachers.
what all you want to
Yeah,
talk
I'm not,
about.
I'm not
And
saying
you
let's
are
go and hire
saying,
10
well,
teachers, I'm just saying, maybe we should kind of look at some of these
Right.
classes, are we doing the right thing for our kids?
Right, I get that. And you are saying something a little, well, sort of similar, a little different.
I'm just saying that if our goals are to have academic performance
Right.
included, then you put your money there.
Mhm.
You don't put your money, I'm gonna pick out one that was a hot button, you don't put it on the late bus, okay?
Okay.
I realize that
Right.
that creates some other thing, but part of the answer is that we ask parents to contribute to, get bussed in now to buy a seat. There's other ways to do that, and if our goal, and we believe class size relates to that, and I believe it does in terms of engagement, I know some of the research says you have to get down substantially below that, but that's also served as a cop-out recently to not to do anything between 20 and 32. And, so I think if we really believe on those goals, then you have to cash your chips. You have to cash your chips there and find out some other things you can't do, which are maybe hit some high-profile parents and people who will readily complain.
Well, part of my thought is to really talk about something like that might require a whole separate ad hoc study committee, because you really do have to look at a lot of the research, and you really do have to bring in I mean, you really do have to look at more in depth at what's going on and what do the teachers see as needs. I mean, maybe that's not what their choice. I mean, I've heard some teachers say in the past, they would rather keep the class sizes slightly on the higher end than cut opportunities for kids. I'm not sure everybody'd say that, but I have heard some say that. And I think if you ask an elementary teacher, what do you feel you need to bring up the reading level of all your kids? They might say that as the first thing, or they might say something else. So I guess I think it's a little hard for us to just impose our thought of number. I mean, you know, as
It
I
has
said to
also
Jeff.
to do with.
So it's a bigger topic than just a discussion, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. I'm almost thinking you're asking for a
It's not just the
separate,
numbers, it has to
you're
do
asking
with
for a separate committee to
teaching
look at it.
stations in some cases. It also has to do whether there are, you start to get too high
Sure.
maintenance kids in a classroom that require often physical constraint. That makes a big difference on teaching time
Sure
and
it does.
engagement time with the teacher has.
Right.
You know, and I don't see those variables. I think they're brought in when the principal deals with them, but we're not.
They're brought in with the class makeup when the classes are determined and that kind of thing, but yeah. Lana?
I'm gonna say, wouldn't some of this, or most of it be addressed during strategic planning, assuming that
That's kind of what I'm thinking.
achievement
yeah.
gap would be part of it, of the strategic plan, class, you know, and all those,
Figuring out how to address
yeah,
it, correct.
all
So
those
that's-
things that feed into that would be looked at and addressed through that.
That's exactly what,
Absolutely. I mean,
that's
you look at
exactly
So,
what
I mean, I don't think there was a
Going with
need
that,
to
yeah.
form a different committee
Right.
and look at all these other areas when it's gonna be done in relation to that.
Right, I think that was kind of my next thought that was coming, and I,
No, that's fair, I mean, that's
Yeah.
fair.
When you get to the staffing plan next year, that's when we'll have the discussion probably anyway.
Yeah, but you're right, there's two places. One is when we make the recommendation to the board for the staffing, which is coming up this spring. And you're right, the second thing is in the strategic planning. That absolutely is something, if we're looking at trying to, you know, in the idea of continuous improvement, is that one of the actions that will help us get there, lower class size? And is the venue where we should have that discussion.
right, right. I think that makes sense.
And I do commend you guys for not trying to throw one here and one there in open enrollment, you know, but I mean, I do understand that it is a priority, it's just,
Right.
Well, I think
Well,
open
it's the law.
enrollment's been managed marvelously
right.
in terms of controlling,
In the last
optimizing revenue and keeping class sizes.
4 to 5
within-
years, thank you, Jared.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. All right. Anything else? Are we ready to, we have
shouldn't
the
say
first
marvelous.
long-range planning committee coming up January 19th.
Previous boards took everything.
Of the, just the board members, not the whole committee. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
You've got it.
All right, is there a second? Lionel, you want to make a second?
A second.
All right.
Oh, we should
All
let
those in
Lionel make
favor
the
signify by
motion.
saying
Oh,
aye.
he's number 2 man. He always.
Sure you wanna run?
Did you hear that? All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.